I had always loved camping, finding solace in nature's embrace. That weekend I ventured into the remote forests of Oregon, seeking tranquility away from the city's chaos. The forecast mentioned rain, but I was undeterred. Little did I know, this trip would forever change my perception of solitude. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered ominously overhead. The air grew heavy, and the forest fell eerily silent. I hastened to set up my tent beside a small clearing, the impending storm urging me to seek shelter. Night descended quickly, and the rain intensified, drumming relentlessly against my tent. The world outside became a blur of shadows and sounds, the once familiar forest now transformed into an alien landscape. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag, trying to find comfort in its warmth. Amidst the symphony of rain, a distinct sound caught my attention. A twig snapping. I dismissed it as a deer or some small creature, but my senses were now on high alert. Every rustle, every creak seemed amplified in the darkness. Then I heard them. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling my tent. My heart pounded as I strained to listen, each step distinct despite the pouring rain. I held my breath, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Summoning my courage, I grabbed my flashlight, the beam trembling as much as my hands. I called, "Oh, is someone there?" Silence. Only the relentless rain answered. I unzipped the tent slowly, my heart racing. The light revealed bare human footprints in the mud, leading directly to my tent and stopping at the entrance. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the area, but there was no sign of anyone. The forest stood silent, as if holding its breath. Fear anchored me inside my tent. I sat there, clutching my flashlight, every nerve on edge. The footsteps had stopped, but the terror remained. Sleep was impossible. I waited, listening, dreading the return of those steps. The first light of dawn seeped through the canopy, and the rain had ceased. Cautiously, I emerged from my tent. The footprints were still there, now partially washed away by the rain, but unmistakable. They led into the forest, but vanished after a few yards. I searched the vicinity, calling out, but received no response. There were no other campsites nearby, no signs of anyone else having been there. The isolation I had once sought now felt like a trap. Unease gnawed at me. I packed up hastily, the forest silence now oppressive. As I hiked back, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves set my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Back home, I scoured the internet for similar experiences. I found tales of campers hearing footsteps, finding unexplained footprints, but no concrete explanations. Some spoke of hermits, others of spirits. None brought comfort. I never imagined that a simple camping trip could turn into a haunting mystery that still chills me to the bone. One stormy night, amidst the howling winds and relentless rain, one of us vanished along with his tent, leaving behind only eerie clues and unanswered questions. It was supposed to be an adventurous weekend getaway. My friends and I had planned this camping trip for months, choosing a secluded spot deep in the woods to escape the hustle and bustle of daily life. The forecast warned of storms, but we were undeterred, seeking thrill in nature's raw embrace. As night fell, the storm arrived with a vengeance. Winds howled like tortured spirits, and rain battered our tents mercilessly. We huddled inside, the thin fabric walls barely shielding us from nature's wrath. Conversations turned to nervous laughter, masking the unease that crept into our hearts. Morning came, and with it an unsettling calm. The storm had passed, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Emerging from our tents, we were met with a chilling sight. One tent was missing, along with our friend Mark. Panic set in as we called out his name, our voices swallowed by the dense forest. Our frantic search led us to the nearby riverbank. There we found Mark's shoes neatly placed side by side, and his flashlight lying in the mud, still flickering weakly. It was as if he had stepped out for a moment and vanished into thin air. The river's murky waters offered no clues, only deepening our dread. Hours turned into days, and search teams combed the area, finding no trace of Mark or his tent. The forest, once our playground, had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, sent our hearts racing as the weight of the unknown pressed heavily upon us. Speculations ran wild. Some believed Mark had wandered off, disoriented by the storm. Others whispered about the river's hidden currents, capable of swallowing a person whole. But the most unsettling theory was that something else, something beyond our understanding, had taken him that night. The mystery of Mark's disappearance echoed the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident, where 9 hikers vanished under bizarre circumstances in 1959. Their tent was found torn from the inside, and their bodies scattered, some with fatal injuries. The parallels sent shivers down our spines as we pondered the terrifying possibilities. Months have passed, but the memory of that stormy night remains vivid. The forest, once a place of adventure, now haunts my dreams. I can't shake the feeling that something watches from the shadows, waiting. The unanswered questions gnaw at my sanity, and the fear that whatever took Mark might still be out there lingers. If this tale has unsettled you, please like, subscribe, and share. And remember, when you venture into the wild, respect its mysteries, for you never know what may be lurking in the shadows. Have you ever been alone in the wilderness, surrounded by darkness, when an unexplainable sound pierces the silence? A sound that chills you to the bone, making you question everything you thought you knew about the world. I experienced such a night that still haunts my dreams. It was supposed to be a simple family camping trip. My wife, our 2 children, and I had set up camp in a secluded area of the forest. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies, but as night fell, dark clouds gathered and a steady rain began to pour. We huddled inside our tent, listening to the rhythmic patter of raindrops against the canvas. Just as we were settling down to sleep, a distant scream echoed through the trees. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the wind, but unmistakably human. We exchanged uneasy glances, telling ourselves it was probably an animal or another camper. But deep down, we knew it was neither. Minutes passed, and the screams grew louder, closer. Yet strangely, the tone and pitch never changed, as if the screamer was stationary, but the sound itself was moving. It circled our campsite, an auditory illusion that defied explanation. Fear tightened its grip on us. Unable to ignore it any longer, I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The cold rain hit my face as I stepped into the night. The screams ceased abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence. I scanned the trees, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but saw nothing. As I turned to re-enter the tent, something caught my eye. There, in the mud just outside the tent flap, was a single soaking wet footprint. It was bare, human, and pointed directly toward our tent. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that whoever, or whatever, had been out there was standing right at our door. I hurried back inside, locking the tent behind me. We sat in tense silence, ears straining for any sound. The rain continued to fall, masking any subtle noises. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle, every creak of the trees set our nerves on edge. When dawn finally broke, we cautiously emerged from the tent. The forest was eerily quiet, the night's terror seemingly washed away by the morning light. But the footprint remained, a chilling reminder of our ordeal. We packed up hastily, eager to leave the haunted woods behind. Back in town, we recounted our experience to the locals. Their faces grew pale, and they exchanged knowing glances. One old man spoke up, telling us of the silent screamer, a spirit doomed to wander the forest, forever searching for help that never comes. Encounters were rare, but those who heard the screams were marked. One fateful night, my wife and I discovered that some storms bring more than just rain and thunder. We had always been avid campers, seeking solace in nature's embrace. That weekend, we ventured into a remote area, miles away from the nearest town, eager to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered ominously overhead. The distant rumble of thunder warned us of an impending storm, but we were undeterred. We set up our tent, prepared a simple meal, and settled in as the first raindrops began to fall. The storm intensified rapidly. Lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in stark, brief intervals. It was during one of these flashes that we saw him, a lone figure standing at the edge of our campsite, drenched and motionless, staring directly at us. My heart raced. Who was this man? Why was he here, in such a remote location, in the midst of a raging storm? I grabbed our flashlight and shone it towards him, calling out to offer assistance. But he remained silent, unresponsive, his gaze fixed upon us. Another flash of lightning, and he was gone, vanished. We hadn't heard him move, no rustling of leaves or snapping of twigs, just gone. We spent the rest of the night in uneasy silence, the storm's fury matching our internal turmoil. At dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the forest drenched and eerily quiet. As we stepped out of our tent, we froze. Muddy handprints covered the fabric, smeared across the entrance and sides. They were too large to be either of ours. A chilling realization set in. The man hadn't just watched us. He had approached our tent, close enough to leave those prints. Yet we had heard nothing over the storm's roar. The forest, once our sanctuary, now felt like a predator's lair. We packed up hastily, our desire for adventure replaced by a need for safety. Back in town, we recounted our experience to the locals, hoping for some logical explanation. Their faces grew pale, and an uneasy silence filled the room. An elderly man finally spoke up. He told us of a legend, a tale of a hermit who once lived deep in those woods. Shunned by society, he became a ghostly figure, haunting campers during storms, seeking solace or perhaps revenge. Whether it was a restless spirit or a flesh-and-blood intruder, we couldn't say. But the memory of that stormy night, the piercing gaze of the stranger, and the phantom handprints remain etched in our minds, a haunting reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the light. I never thought I'd experience true fear until that night under the whispering rain. It was late autumn, and I had decided to take a solo camping trip to clear my mind. The forest was a place of solace for me, a sanctuary where I could escape the chaos of everyday life. I chose a secluded spot deep within the Oregon wilderness, miles away from the nearest town. The weather forecast predicted rain, but I welcomed it. The sound of raindrops tapping against my tent always brought me peace. I arrived at my chosen campsite in the early afternoon. The sky was a canvas of gray, and a gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of impending rain. I pitched my tent near a small clearing, gathered some firewood, and prepared for the evening ahead. As dusk settled, the forest around me came alive with the sounds of nature, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves, and the distant call of an owl. As night fell, the predicted rain began to pour, its rhythmic patter against my tent lulling me into a state of relaxation. I sat by the fire, sipping hot tea, and listened to the symphony of the storm. The world outside was a blur of shadows and rain, but inside my tent I felt cocooned, safe from the elements. Sometime around midnight, I was jolted awake by an unfamiliar sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I strained to listen, I realized it was something else entirely. Whispers. Faint, indistinct murmurs seemed to encircle my tent, barely audible over the relentless rain. My heart pounded as I tried to make out the words, but the language was foreign, and the voices, there were multiple, sounded childlike. Summoning my courage, I unzipped the tent and peered into the rain-soaked darkness. The beam of my flashlight cut through the downpour, revealing nothing but trees and underbrush. The whispers had ceased, replaced by the steady drumming of rain, I called out, asking if anyone was there, but only the forest answered with its silence. Unease settled in my stomach as I retreated back into my tent, convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me. Morning arrived, gray and dreary. The rain had reduced to a light drizzle. Stepping outside, I stretched and took a deep breath of the crisp air. As I turned to inspect my tent, my blood ran cold. Covering the fabric were dozens of small, muddy handprints, too small to be an adult's, yet too numerous and high up to be from any forest creature I knew. Each print was distinct, fingers splayed as if pressed deliberately. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. The events of the night before flooded back, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. I needed answers. Packing up my gear hastily, I decided to hike to the nearest ranger station, hoping someone could shed light on the bizarre occurrences. The forest, once my refuge, now felt oppressive, each shadow hiding unseen eyes. At the ranger station, I recounted my experience to the officer on duty. Her face grew pale as she listened. She told me that years ago, a group of children had gone missing in that very forest. Despite extensive searches, they were never found. Since then, campers occasionally reported hearing children's voices or finding small handprints around their sites, especially during rainy nights. Have you ever experienced a silence so profound, so unnatural, that it felt as if the world itself had paused? One night, nestled by the comforting sounds of a rushing river and a gentle rain, my friends and I encountered such a silence that still haunts me to this day. It was late September, and our group of 5 had decided to escape the hustle and bustle of city life for a weekend camping trip. We chose a secluded spot by a river, deep within Oregon's lush forests. The forecast predicted rain, but we welcomed it, imagining the soothing symphony of raindrops and flowing water lulling us to sleep. As night fell, the rain began just as expected, a gentle patter that harmonized with the river's murmur. We huddled under a tarp, sharing stories and laughter, feeling a world away from our daily routines. Suddenly, without warning, all sounds ceased. The rain, the wind, the river, everything fell into an unnatural silence. We sat frozen, exchanging bewildered glances, each of us straining to hear anything. A rustle, a drip, but there was nothing. Minutes stretched on, the silence pressing down on us like a weight. The familiar sounds we had taken for granted were gone, replaced by an oppressive void. I could see the unease growing in my friend's eyes, mirroring the fear creeping into my own heart. Just as abruptly as it had vanished, the symphony of the night returned. The rain's patter, the river's flow, the whispering wind, all rushed back in a cacophony that was almost deafening after the profound silence. We let out breaths we didn't realize we'd been holding, but the unease lingered. We tried to laugh it off, attributing the silence to some unexplained natural phenomenon, but the night's events had cast a pall over our spirits. We decided to pack up and leave at dawn, the forest no longer feeling like the sanctuary it had been just hours before. Even now, I can't explain what happened that night. Was it a natural anomaly, or something beyond our understanding? The memory of that oppressive silence, where the world seemed to hold its breath, still sends chills down my spine. After returning home, I delved into research, seeking any explanation for the sudden silence. I found accounts of similar experiences, moments where nature's sounds ceased without warning, but no definitive answers. Some scientists attribute it to sudden atmospheric changes, while others suggest more mysterious causes. Some theories propose that such silences occur when predators are near, causing prey animals to fall silent. Others suggest that certain geological or atmospheric conditions can momentarily dampen sound. But none of these theories fully explain the complete absence of sound we experienced. Not just the animals, but the river and rain as well. The experience left a lasting mark on all of us. Some of my friends refused to camp near rivers anymore. I remember that night vividly, a relentless storm, my solitary tent, and a figure at the edge of the trees that still haunts my dreams. This is the story of the drenched man in the woods. It was late October when I decided to embark on a solo camping trip in the Pacific Northwest. The forecast mentioned possible showers, but I was undeterred. The forest's autumn beauty was irresistible, and I yearned for solitude amidst nature's embrace. By late afternoon, I had set up camp near a small clearing. As dusk settled, dark clouds gathered and the wind picked up. The first droplets of rain tapped on my tent, a prelude to the tempest that was about to unleash its fury. Night fell, and the rain intensified into a torrential downpour. The rhythmic drumming on the tent's fabric was both soothing and isolating. Inside, I felt cocooned, unaware that my perception of safety was about to be shattered. Around midnight, a flash of lightning illuminated the forest, and through the brief brilliance I saw him. A man standing at the tree line, drenched from head to toe, staring directly at my tent. My heart raced. Who could be out there in such a storm? I unzipped the tent slightly and called out, asking if he needed help. My voice was swallowed by the storm's roar. The man remained motionless, his eyes locked onto mine, unblinking and devoid of emotion. Another lightning bolt split the sky, and for a split second I lost sight of him. When darkness returned, he was gone. I scanned the area frantically, but there was no trace, no footprints, no rustling leaves, just the relentless rain. Fear gnawed at me, making sleep impossible. Every gust of wind, every creak of the trees, heightened my anxiety. I clutched my flashlight, its beam trembling as much as my hands, waiting for dawn to break the night's grip. At first light, I emerged from the tent, the storm reduced to a light drizzle. I approached the spot where the man had stood. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no broken branches. It was as if he had been a figment of my imagination. Later that day, I encountered park rangers patrolling the area. I recounted my experience, hoping they had an explanation. They exchanged uneasy glances before one spoke. No one else should be out here. You're the only registered camper in this section. Seeing my distress, one ranger pulled me aside and shared a local legend. Years ago, a man had disappeared during a storm, much like the one I endured. His body was never found, and since then, campers occasionally report sightings of a drenched man, always during heavy rain. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I might have encountered the restless spirit of that lost soul. The memory of his vacant eyes and the way he vanished without a trace haunted me long after I left those woods. Even now, storms unsettle me. The sound of rain against my window transports me back to that night. I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, wandering the woods, searching for something or someone to end his eternal torment. Have you ever felt truly isolated, surrounded by nature's vastness, only to realize that something is watching you? I never believed in the supernatural, until that night in the rain-soaked wilderness when my son and I encountered something that defied all logic. What we saw, and the evidence it left behind, still haunts me to this day. It was supposed to be a simple father-son camping trip. The forecast predicted rain, but we were undeterred. We pitched our tent amidst the towering trees, the sound of raindrops creating a rhythmic symphony on the canvas above. My son Jake was thrilled, his laughter echoing through the forest as we settled in for the night. Sometime past midnight, I was jolted awake by Jake's trembling voice. "Dad, there's something outside." I brushed it off as a child's nightmare, reassuring him that it was just the wind, or perhaps a curious animal. But deep down, an inexplicable unease began to take root. Just as I was about to drift back to sleep, Jake whispered, "Dad, look!" I followed his gaze to the tent's thin fabric. There, amidst the relentless rain, were two glowing eyes, unblinking, fixed directly on us. My heart raced, every rational thought drowned by primal fear. Summoning courage, I grabbed the flashlight and unzipped the tent, stepping into the cold, wet night. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and falling rain. No tracks, no signs of wildlife, just an oppressive silence that swallowed every sound. Morning light brought a semblance of safety. As we prepared to leave, something caught my eye, a series of wet footprints circling our tent. They were human-like but elongated, with an unnatural gait. Strangely, there was only one set leading away, none approaching. It was as if the entity had materialized from the very shadows. A chilling thought gripped me. Whatever had watched us wasn't of this world. The glowing eyes, the inexplicable footprints, it felt like a warning, a manifestation of something beyond our comprehension. We hastily packed, the weight of unseen eyes heavy upon us. The drive back was shrouded in silence. Jake stared out the window, his youthful exuberance replaced by a somber demeanor. I gripped the steering wheel, replaying the night's events, questioning my own sanity. How could I protect my son from something I couldn't understand? Weeks passed, but the memories lingered. Jake's nightmares became frequent, his drawings filled with dark forests and glowing eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had trespassed into a realm where we weren't welcome, and that whatever lurked there had followed us home. To this day, I wonder what we encountered in those woods. Was it a guardian of the forest, a restless spirit, or something far more sinister? One thing is certain, some mysteries are best left undisturbed, and some eyes once seen can never be forgotten. Have you ever woken up to find your best friend vanished without a trace? I have. One stormy night in the wilderness, I awoke to an empty tent, muddy boots, and a single, inexplicable handprint. This is the story of how my best friend disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a mystery that still haunts me. We had been planning this camping trip for months, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of daily life and reconnect with nature. My best friend Mark and I chose a secluded spot deep in the forest, far from any trails or other campers. The forecast had predicted clear skies, but as night fell, ominous clouds gathered overhead. By the time we finished dinner, the wind had picked up, and thunder rumbled in the distance. We secured our gear and retreated into the tent, the fabric walls flapping violently as the storm unleashed its fury. Rain pelted down, and the once comforting sounds of the forest were drowned out by the tempest. Sometime after midnight, I awoke abruptly. The storm still raged outside, but something felt off. I reached out in the darkness to where Mark should have been, but my hand met only cold, empty space. Fumbling for the flashlight, I called his name, but the howling wind swallowed my words. My flashlight beam revealed Mark's sleeping bag, unzipped and empty, his muddy boots still neatly placed at the foot. Panic set in as I noticed something even more unsettling. A single, muddy handprint smeared on the outside of the tent, fingers trailing downward as if someone had been dragged away. I scrambled out of the tent, shouting Mark's name into the storm. The rain-soaked ground should have been covered in footprints, but there were none, only undisturbed mud and the relentless downpour. My heart pounded as I searched the perimeter, each flash of lightning revealing nothing but the oppressive darkness of the forest. After what felt like hours, exhaustion took over. I retreated to the tent, hoping Mark would somehow return. The storm began to subside, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches set my nerves on edge as I sat alone, clutching the flashlight, sleep an impossible luxury. At first light, I hiked back to the nearest ranger station, and a search party was organized. Dozens of volunteers combed the forest, but there was no sign of Mark, no footprints, no clothing, nothing. It was as if he had been swallowed whole by the wilderness, leaving no trace behind. As days turned into weeks, theories about Mark's disappearance ran wild. Some suggested he had wandered off and gotten lost, but how could he have left without his boots, leaving no footprints? Others whispered about wild animals or even something more sinister lurking in the woods. I was left with more questions than answers, each more terrifying than the last. Months have passed and Mark is still missing. I can't shake the image of that solitary handprint and the empty boots. The forest took my best friend that night, and I fear it may never give him back. Every time I close my eyes, I see that handprint, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved.